The council meeting last night. First of all, let's talk housing. I believe that was on the agenda. What kind of things were discussed?
Well, really, it's just about having a plan, having a future for housing. At the moment, obviously, affordable housing, availability of housing, they're all issues. So there were a couple of things that came up last night at council meeting. One was just a report into some sort of direction, some sort of future. Where are we going with housing? What solutions can we put forward? So that was really just going to the staff and asking for that report. And that's following on from some previous discussions, some previous workshops we've held, some previous meetings with some stakeholder groups. So it's continuing on that because obviously we can't keep having no plan, and that's probably been in the past. There hasn't been a really good plan in place from Dubbo Regional Council, so this is really about making sure we've got a plan. And some of that is around trying to address some of the short-term issues. They're the hardest ones to address. Long-term, having a strategy, having a vision, we can do that a bit easier, but really trying to take care of those short-term issues. The other part was the method of sale for Keswick Estate. So we've got a range of blocks that will be actually selling at Keswick Estate. 52 blocks will be selling there. They'll be on sale and ready to build on by the end of June. And it was about going forward with a method of sale there. So we're actually going to auction those blocks off, which is a bit unusual for council to auction off a whole lot of blocks like that. We've done it before in small parts when we've had some dual occupancy blocks or certain sections, but this is basically going forward to auction off all those blocks. Because the market is so volatile, it's very hard for council to set a price on all of those. So going to auction seemed to be the best way to get a good return for council on those blocks of land.
So just on Keswick, I know that Shibley has been pushing for more land releases. What's happening on that front?
Yeah, so that was really part of, a previous workshop that we'd held where we talked about pushing a bit harder, going a bit harder. The problem for council, as with any developer, is how much money do you invest in the process in terms of bringing those blocks of land on sale earlier. And so normally what a developer will do is they'll develop some of those blocks, they'll sell them, take the profits from that, put them into the next lot of blocks and go forward from that perspective. In some of the workshops, we've had some discussions with our staff and we've said that we need to almost throw out the normal method at the moment because we need to bring on blocks much quicker. So we agreed on that, and what Shibley, Councillor Chowdhury's done in relation to that particular notice of motion he brought forward was really to emphasise that and make it a formal approach. We've informally talked about that approach with our staff, but this now makes it more formal, where essentially we're saying let's bring on those blocks of land as quick as possible. Let's spend some money up front, knowing that we won't get a return on that for maybe several years because we'll be spending more money on putting infrastructure in the ground, getting more blocks of land ready for sale, and then sell those as we go through there. I think the risk to the communities very low because houses or land is selling so quickly, land is selling at good prices, so I think it's worthwhile investing that money in the infrastructure up front, knowing that we'll get those sales down the track. Yes,
that seems to make sense. Now, talk to me about doctors. Was there anything, I mean, this is an ongoing problem and one I dare say the government is largely responsible for. But what can council do in this space in regard to the medical shortages we face here in Dubbo?
So there was no discussion about doctors last night at the council meeting, and there hasn't really been a lot of discussion from the community in the time that I've been on council, in the last four months that I've been on council. We haven't really seen a lot of discussion from the community about doctors. Now, obviously, health is not a council issue per se. Obviously, it's a community issue, but health is not a council issue. So I dare say people that have been worried about lack of medical facilities have probably been more approaching state and to a certain extent their federal members or federal representatives. But I haven't seen a lot of discussion around doctors and lack of availability there from people in our community directly around that, maybe because they know that it's not something that we can control directly.
Yeah, sorry, that's what I thought. So I don't know why it was on my list. I have a feeling I thought it was on your agenda, but that must have been a mistake. Okay, 24-hour policing in Wellington has been something that's been on the agenda for a while. Was this discussed?
That wasn't on the agenda last night either, but we have had a meeting with Danny Sullivan, the Superintendent of Police. There was a council meeting held earlier this month, and that was just a discussion around what policing is there in place at the moment. It's one of the things I think that's important that came out of that meeting was really the fact that the police emphasise that there's really two main phone numbers for people to ring. 000, obviously, if it's an emergency. I think we've all learned that from when we've been young at school. If it's an emergency, if it's a life-threatening situation, ring 000, don't hesitate. If it's something where you're trying to report a crime, if it's something where it's not life-threatening, then 131 444 is the best number to use. So rather than trying to ring your local police station, some people really get this idea that, especially in Wellington, for example, they want to ring the local police station. But what was emphasised to us by Danny Sullivan, that if you ring 131 444, there's someone that can take the call. They can take the call within a certain time frame. That's what it's all set up to do. But they can get that information out to the relevant police. And so every police car now is almost a mini police station. So the police out in their police cars can get information directly from 131 444. They can have that information sent to them, and they can probably respond faster than if you actually physically go down to the Wellington police station, for example. So that was a good discussion, and I think councillors from that thought to themselves, we've got to get out, and people that talk to us in the community, we need to tell them 000 and 131 444 are the two numbers that they should have in their mind all the time.
Okay, now something that I thought might come up tonight, parking sensors. There's been some concern that you guys are going to start charging us for parking. Was that on the agenda?
Not charging for parking, no. Certainly the idea of running a trial with parking sensors is something that we're certainly going to be doing, and that'll be the same as we have people now who walk around the streets and do, if you like, the old-fashioned way of marking tyres and coming back, and if you're there still over an hour later, if it's 1 hour parking, then they can actually do a parking fine there on the spot. The idea of parking sensors will just make that process, that same process we've got now, make it more efficient. And it's only going to be in a small area in a trial to see how well that works and see whether we roll it out across a wider scale. But at the moment, there hasn't even been a discussion around parking meters. It's really just about making the current staff that we've got more efficient, because what will happen with parking sensors is if someone is parked in the same spot for too long, our parking inspectors, rather than physically walking around, checking tyres, physically checking what's there, they'll actually get an alert to say that a certain car has been parked in a certain spot for too long, so they can then go directly to that particular car. So it's doing the same method that we've got now with a bit more efficiency by using technology.
Okay, well, that makes sense. What about water rates? Did they come up?
Water rates didn't come up per se, except to say that our draft budget and all of our draft charges for the 2022-23 financial year were approved last night to be put on public display. So yes, that includes water prices. Obviously, that includes every charge, all the fees, etc., that will be charged by council from the 1st of July onwards. They're now officially been approved by councillors to be put on public display. They'll go on public display shortly, and then we'd encourage the community to definitely have a look through that. Whatever area of council you're interested in, whatever your focus is, have a look at those charges, have a look at all of that budget, and send your submissions in. That's something that's really important for the community to tell us what they think, so that we can then, when we finally ratify the budget, make any changes, any fine-tuning we might need to make, the community has had their chance to have that input and their say into that.
Now, I didn't cover all the issues. What else came up that was significant, Matthew?
I think one of the things that was created a bit of a concern for people, and it was a worthwhile debate to have, was in relation to the Aerodrome at Wellington. So down at Badangry, you've got an airstrip there. At the moment, that's being used for a range of activities. Obviously, planes land on that airstrip, which kind of makes sense. You have drag racing on there. There's some driver testing that occurs on there. There's some other activities on that airstrip from time to time or around that airstrip. We have fire testing there in one of the facilities just near there, for example. And trying to get to the point where that airstrip actually doesn't cost the ratepayers of our community too much money. Even we dream of the fact that it might get back to paying for itself. And one of the issues that was brought up last night was the idea that that may well be cut off from the drag strip users and only be able to be used as an airstrip going forward until we either get some funding or work out what our business model might be. And that was a worthwhile debate to have. That was brought forward by a councillor. That debate went through. There was obviously some concern from the users of the drag strip club, for example. Had some speakers at public forum, in both directions. And that's always great when we see the community get involved in public forum. But in the end, councillors decided that it was best to keep using that facility as a multi-use facility so the drag club can keep using that. Obviously, airplanes will keep landing. Whatever other uses we can get out of that airstrip and that area, we want to keep doing that to be able to finally get to that point where we hopefully we get as close to breaking even as possible. But again, as a multi-use facility and going forward, looking for funding as well was ratified by council as well. So looking for significant funds to upgrade that airstrip as well. So that's something that's been discussed more in the Wellington community than the Dubbo community, but certainly a big issue that's been discussed there.
Now, the last thing I want to bring up is the idea of council trying to look at environmentally sound kind of practices. Now, there was a mention of LED lights, I believe, and maybe some more electric car charging stations around the region. Were these kind of things discussed?
They weren't specifically discussed. They all of those things are part of our community strategic plan long term. That wasn't something that was specifically discussed last night at council. But the items you mentioned there are certainly things that we want to go forward with, looking at ways to look after the environment better, look at things like, as you say, different types of lighting. It might be electric vehicles, more electric vehicles in the fleet of council. Really look at ways, and a lot of those ways are also saving money because obviously electricity is expensive. So trying to get to that right balance where you're using as little electricity as possible, but you don't want to pay huge amounts of money extra for those devices that might use less electricity. LED lighting was one example where it used to be very expensive to buy LED lights, and you do a calculation and see how many years it might take you to pay off those LED lights on the cheaper electricity or the less electricity that you would use. And that equation is getting much easier now because LED lighting is getting much cheaper. But council's always looking at those things to look after the bottom line financially for council and also to try and look after the environment. Getting the balance between those two is the real challenge. You don't want to go absolutely crazy in one way, in one direction or the other. You're really trying to do it a transition, a sensible transition.
Now, in summary, your strategic plan was approved and will go on display, will it, for public submissions from this point on?
No, our long-term community strategic plan has already been on display and those submissions are finished. Last night was all about our budget. So this is about how we'll spend our money next year, how what our finances look like for next financial year, and inviting comment once that goes on display, which will go on display shortly, inviting comment from the community about that. But that was really, last night was really about just that budget for next year. And the process there is that that'll go on display during May, and then that will come back. So we want to give people enough time to have a look at that, give us their submissions, give us their ideas, and then that'll come back to a meeting in June for council to modify the budget, change whatever needs to be changed, take that feedback from the community, and then obviously we need to absolutely give that the tick of approval because from the 1st of July that has to come in, so that has to be done during the month of June.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam.
And I'll talk to you later.
Thank you.